12. We'll finish chapter 12 tonight, no matter what. Even if we don't finish it, we'll finish chapter 12 tonight, no matter what. We're going to be picking up at verse 24. As we work our way there, something of note is that in this chapter there has been strong emphasis put on the idea of works and deeds. Deeds and words, rather. The first 13 verses, 12 verses in particular, focus very much on the idea of actions. While words are mentioned, actions are an emphasis, whereas picking up at verse 13, there seems to be a transition where the emphasis is a bit more on words than deeds. Throughout the entirety of the chapter, words and deeds are intermingled, and there are four major ideas that tend to stand prominent in terms of duties and responsibilities. There's the idea of intellectual responsibility and a duty toward wisdom and practicing wisdom, a willingness to learn. And if wisdom means nothing else, then it's to involve a willingness to learn. The moment I think I've learned everything is the moment I've stepped out of the realm of wisdom and into the realm of foolishness. So there's an intellectual responsibility. Of course, there's also the moral responsibility. Time and again, the word righteousness is utilized, and righteousness is placed side by side with wisdom. Thus, a true intellectual wisdom is going to be a moral righteousness as well. There's material responsibility that's mentioned over and over again. That idea is introduced in verse 3, and it repeats throughout the chapter. And then a domestic responsibility in terms of how our decisions and our application of wisdom and righteousness is going to impact not just our home, but our decisions regarding the home. Now, all of that being said, by the time we get to verse 24, we've just come through a series of verses that develop a very specific thought regarding our responsibilities with our words and our use of our words. Moral, intellectual, material, domestic are all rolled into it. But in verses, really picking up at verse 13 and moving forward, but especially verses 16 through 23, what we say and what we don't say is spotlighted. Because there's a time to speak and a time to practice the divine law of hush. But not only is it what we say and what we don't say that's spotlighted, but also how the contents of what we say. Contrast between deception and truth. Verse 17, he that speaketh truth shows forth righteousness, but a false witness deceit. And we've already mentioned how a person's tendency to insert lies and untruths in his speech is a reflection on who that person is. For generations, we've told children about the boy that cried wolf. And that third time he cried wolf, nobody listened to him. Isn't it funny how we forget that whenever politicians open their mouths? And then we start believing the ones that have been lying for 47 years or however long they've been in office. The fact of the matter is that the one that consistently speaketh, ETH, continuous action, truth is continually showing forth righteousness. But a false witness, the repeated lies are a reflection not only of deception in the moment, but of a deceptive person. Why would I be so gullible as to believe that person moving forward? There is that speaks like the piercings of a sword. Not only is truth emphasized, but there's a way to present truth. Not like the piercings of a sword, but with the tongue of the wise, which is health, which finds a way to deliver the message in a manner that's going to be prudent and beneficial to those that need to receive it. So there's an emphasis on what to say and what not to say. There's an emphasis on what to use in speech, truth, as opposed to what not to use. And there's an emphasis on how to present what we say in terms of providing it in a manner that's going to be beneficial. The lip of truth shall be established forever. That's going to endure. But the lying tongue is but for a moment. That won't endure. Again, this thought develops and stands prominent. When we get to verse 23, here's a reiteration of actually verse 22. Lying lips are abomination to the Lord, but they that deal truly are His delight. Don't just look at lying lips and think, well, the one that can't tell the truth. Oh, he fits the category. But lying lips are also going to be those who speak as the piercings of a sword. Lying lips are going to be the ones who not only have spoken deception now, but have a tendency toward it. Lying lips are going to be all of those who fit the bill of what is spoken against in the preceding verses. So, lying lips are an abomination to the Lord. If I can't tell the truth, if I can't tell the truth in a way that's at least intended to be receivable by those I'm endeavoring to address, that's not a delight in His sight. They that deal truly are His delight. Verse 22. Verse 23, a prudent man conceals knowledge. Here we are again. A prudent man knows when not to speak. Conceals knowledge. The heart of fools proclaimeth foolishness. One point to make here before we advance. Does the prudent man feel like he has to share everything that he knows? Now, sometimes the motivation to share everything a person knows is a parade of pride. Now, I want everyone to know how much I know. And if someone comes to me with information that was confidential that's just been made public, I'm going to make sure that they know that I knew before they did. Sometimes it's a parade of pride. You know, it's okay to let people think they knew something before you knew it. It's okay to play dumb. I've mastered it. It's great. It's okay to keep information to yourself. It doesn't have to be a parade of pride. But then there are others that are just in a rage of wrath. They can't keep their thoughts to themselves because it's some sort of an emotional outpouring. Now, this thought was mentioned all the way back in verse 13. 16 rather. A fool's wrath is presently known, but the prudent covereth shame. The prudent knows to hold his tongue. He knows to pass by an insult. These thoughts being provided, it is absolutely the case that we don't have to feel like we have to share everything that we know. But here's a caveat to add to that. That means that when I get nosy and I'm asking questions, other people don't necessarily have to share everything they know. And if I get in a tizzy, or I get my britches in a bunch, or I have what modern psychologists call a hissy fit, because someone's not sharing information with me that I think that I want to know, but that they have deemed maybe it's not prudent to share with me, maybe I need to get over myself. A prudent man conceals knowledge. Sometimes the prudent conceal knowledge from me. There's a strong application for this in the church. There are a group of men that get together pretty much every time we meet to discuss the oversight of the congregation. And they don't have to come out and give a report of every syllable uttered while they were talking. As a matter of fact, it would be foolishness for them to do so. Do we appreciate that we don't always need to know everything that the elders know? Or maybe we don't always need to know everything that is taking place within this household or that household. Are there times when we might be able to help? Absolutely, yes. But there's also times when discretion has to be practiced, prudence exercised, and knowledge concealed. Whether we're talking about in God's house or in our personal houses, prudence conceals knowledge. It's the heart of fools that just has to tell everything. It's the heart of the fool that just has to get it off of his chest, that just has to say what's on his mind or give people a piece of his mind. By the way, you know what tends to happen with the person that's always giving a piece of his mind? There aren't a whole lot of pieces left. Verse 24. We pick up with where we ended when last we met. Now, we've talked about how these pillars of duty are applicable in deeds and in words. Verses 24 through 27, we're going to call this in all aspects of our existence. Verse 24 is going to bring to mind a thought that was actually referenced all the way back in verse 11, and there's even a sense of it mentioned in verse 3, verses 2 and 3. But for now, verse 24, the hand of the diligent shall bear rule, but the slothful shall be under tribute. What's it mean to be diligent? It's a worker, right? That's someone that's putting forth effort. That's someone that's trying. The hand of the diligent, notice the description is not the hand of the diligent gets riches. Other proverbs hit on the idea of a physical reward for labors. You look back at Proverbs 12, verse 11. He that tilleth his land shall be satisfied with bread. And that's not saying that everyone needs to be a farmer. But the one that does the work shall be satisfied with bread. The laborer is worthy of his reward. Here, it's not just the idea of some sort of sharing of sustenance, so to speak. The hand of the diligent shall bear rule. The ones that work hard are the ones that tend to advance. Is that always the case? No, we're talking about Proverbs. These are general rules. But the hand of the diligent shall bear rule. The slothful shall be under tribute. You know what the worst part about that is for the slothful? Here's the one that's slothful, lazy, slack. One commentary actually described this as the couch potato. Okay? The slothful, the one who doesn't want to work, shall be under tribute. When you read the idea of under tribute in the Old Testament, what's the concept there? Servitude. Just like Solomon would put all of those inhabitants of the land that had not been run out, but they had been subdued and subjugated by the Israelites, they were put into tribute by Solomon. In other words, they were made to be hewers of wood, and they were made to work in the hills of Lebanon in Solomon's labor teams that supplied materials for the building of the temple. Put under tribute. That didn't mean they were taxed just monetarily. That meant that their efforts were taxed. They were put into servitude. So here, Proverbs 12:24, the lazy, the slack, the couch potato, the slothful is put under tribute. He spends all of his efforts trying to avoid work, and guess what he has to do? Guess where he finds himself? I never get madder at me than when I've sat looking at a problem trying to find the most efficient way to do it instead of just getting it done and maybe taking a little bit longer than what the most efficient way would have been. 45 minutes later, what could have taken 20 minutes? Oh, but I found brilliance. No, you haven't. You've wasted an extra 25 minutes. The slothful are those that aren't looking for the efficient way. They're looking for the escape. They find themselves having to do even more work and spend even more time because they were working to avoid work. We can go back and look at the description all the way back in Proverbs 1. My son, picking up at Proverbs 1, verse 11, the counsel is given, my son, if sinners entice thee, consent not. If they say, come, let's lay wait for blood, let's lurk privily for the innocent without cause. You look at the description given of them, and they're putting a whole lot of effort into getting money without effort. They're still putting in the sweat and the effort and the planning. They just don't want to make honest money. Well, here are the slothful, and the only thing distinguishing the slothful from the evil of Proverbs 1:10 and following is that the slothful aren't necessarily going out and breaking a sweat to take what belongs to someone else. They're just trying to sit back on their laurels and let others work for them. Good thing we don't have any of that happening today. The slothful shall be under tribute. And now here they are having to work harder because they've been brought into servitude. And yes, there was a sense of financial servitude among the Israelites. If someone found himself in debt, he would have to sell himself into service and work toward paying off debts and reaching a financial stability. The slothful shall be under tribute. Today, we don't have that same sort of servitude. But how often is it the case that there are those who their eyes have been at the ends of the earth? They've been the dreamers. They've been the ones that can sit back and they can cogitate some cogitations. They can fantasize some fantasies and they can imagine some imaginations. But for them to work, there's a lion in the way, I'll be slain in the streets. Those are the words of the slothful, Proverbs 26. There's always an excuse for why they won't go out and do. I don't know that it can be emphasized enough. Slothfulness is inherently linked to arrogance. Proverbs 26, 11 and 12, the point is made that, do you see a man that's wise in his own conceits? There's more hope of a fool than of him. Well, who's the one that's wise in his own conceits? Proverbs 26, 16. The sluggard is wiser in his own conceits than 7 men that can render a reason. The sluggard, the slothful, is too arrogant to labor. So we come back to Proverbs 12:24. The hand of the diligent shall bear rule. Here's the one that because of his diligence, his hard work pays off. He's recognized for his efforts, and he's entrusted with authority. But the slothful shall be under tribute. So here are the arrogant, cocky, I know everything, I shouldn't have to do anything, couch potatoes, and now they have to work. Guess what kind of employees they make? Guess what kind of attitudes they exhibit? Guess what kind of chips they have on their shoulder, and guess how they treat you when you go through the drive-thru? Or when you come past the register, or when you deal with them in the sales floor, or when you have to encounter them while they are exercising whatever means of authority they could grasp, because there are some that will pursue public service positions just so that they can have a semblance of authority, but they still have a chip on their shoulders because they have to do something. It doesn't do us any good to describe that out in the world. What does us good is to recognize when that takes place among us. How many Christians look like they have that chip on their shoulder in the way that they approach those whose diligence have resulted in authority in service in the church? How many have a chip on their shoulder in dealing with the elders? How many have a chip on their shoulder when they are talking with the deacons in their roles of service? The truth of this Proverbs is challenging. Verse 25. So verse 24, there's the material aspect. There's also a moral sense. Verse 25, heaviness in the heart of man maketh it stoop, but a good word maketh it glad. Here it's not just a matter of labor and effort. Here we come back to the idea of how words can impact a person. Heaviness in the heart of man maketh it stoop. The word heaviness can be connected with that which is burdensome. Some have connected it with anxiety. Whether you're talking about depression or anxiety, which some psychologists will tell you are simply two different manifestations of essentially the same problem. Whether we're talking about depression or anxiety, the point here is this: when it's in the heart of a person, what's the heart? That's the core. That's the center. We're not talking about a person who has reasonable sadness because of a loss. We're talking about someone who is harboring and carrying about anxiety and depression. Heaviness in the heart of man maketh it stoop. There are some that cling to that. There are some that get their feeling of importance by being anxious. The day's not a significant day. The moment's not a significant moment unless there's something for me to worry about, unless there's some sense of anxiety. There's a connection there with the drama mindset. Heaviness in the heart of man maketh it stoop. It's just burdensome. It wears the person down. But a good word maketh it glad. There are those that don't necessarily cling to this. They're willing to come out of this mindset, and granted, there are some that deal with depression and anxiety through no fault of their own. Please don't misunderstand our words here. But there are those that are willing and wanting to abandon the mindset that holds to anxiety and depression, but they need an impetus. They need a light at the end of the tunnel. A good word maketh it glad. Are we the sources of good words? When others are exhibiting anxiety or depression or intense sorrow to the point that it's changed their physical features and expressions, when we have people facing the sort of trials of life that cause us to think of Job, do we have a good word, or do we act like Job's friends? When Job's friends arrived, they said nothing for 7 days. I don't know what their expressions were. I wonder, based on what Job had to say in chapter 3, which seems as though it's already a defense, I wonder if their expressions were exhibiting a judgmental mindset. I know this much. They did a lot better by saying nothing than they did by opening their mouths, because nary a good word left their lips. And they certainly did not aid Job. Matter of fact, Job would say that to him that is afflicted, mercy should be shown from his friend, but you forsake the Almighty. They were actually behaving in a godless manner by the way that they spoke with Job. Miserable counselors are you all, was the way he had described them. A good word can make a heart glad. Do I know how to exhibit a good word? Do I know how to extend counsel? Do I know how to extend comfort? Job's friends tried to comfort him by giving him counsel about how they were right and what he needed to change. There's some folks that may need to change, yet their hearts are so heavy that right now what they need is comforted first. Yes, there are some folks that they stay uncomforted just so that they get pity, and they're never challenged with the call to change. For us, when we endeavor to approach those that are dealing with sorrow, that have heaviness in the heart, do we set out to comfort first, or do we set out to correct? A good word maketh it glad. Do we know how to behave any different than Job's friends did? They were convinced that he was wrong. And in the end, God said, "You've not said a thing right." Oh, those weren't exact words. His exact words were, Job 42:7, "You have not spoken of me that thing which is right, as my servant Job hath." We need to be really careful about condemning Job, impugning Job, or indicting Job for having the questions that he had during the heaviness of sorrow that he faced. God approved of what Job said. Even though God challenged Job, demanding an answer, he approved of Job's conclusions about the goodness of God and the fact that there would be a Redeemer to stand for him at the latter day, and that not all judgment and justice is meted in this world. Now, let's move forward, because I promise we're going to finish this chapter tonight. Verse 25, there's a moral aspect in terms of the words that we exhibit. Verse 26, the righteous is more excellent than his neighbor. Okay, so the first part of this verse has been translated in various ways. There's the idea that the righteous is more excellent than his neighbor. He's just better. It may not be the best translation, but it may not be too far removed from the real idea. The righteous is more excellent than his neighbor. Another translation has the righteous is a guide to his neighbor. That might be the best. That's in the American Standard and the English Standard. Another approach has the righteous searches out his friend. The word translated excellent carries with it the idea of to seek, to search. There's a discernment involved. we can see how that's translated as guide, or as guide in the American Standard or the English Standard. The righteous is the one who searches out and guides, gives counsel, advice to his neighbor. Is it the case that the righteous man tends to be better than his neighbor who's not righteous? Well, yeah. Is it the case that the righteous should be a guide, an influence upon his neighbor? Absolutely. The righteous searches out his neighbor. By implication, that's going to be the case anyway. If the righteous is truly a guide, then he has his eyes open. He's looking at the situation. And he's not only looking at the path to take, but the one walking the path. And if he's giving counsel and advice to his neighbor, then he's going to be discerning about the kind of person this neighbor is. The word translated neighbor could also be translated friend. Thus, there is implicit in this the idea of the righteous is discerning not only of the path that his neighbor should take, but he's discerning about his neighbor, he's discerning about his friend. If we keep the first part of the verse in antithetical contrast with the latter part of the verse, the righteous is more excellent than his neighbor, but the way of the wicked seduceth them. The last part of the verse seems to be far more straightforward in the translations, to the point that we might just conclude it this way. Proverbs 12:26 is talking about who's going to influence who. The righteous is a guide to his neighbor. The righteous is not the one sitting there allowing himself to be swayed and influenced. The righteous is not the one who is at risk of what Paul was concerned for the Ephesians doing, when he said, no longer tossed to and fro, driven about with every wind of doctrine and cunning craftiness whereby they lie in wait to deceive. The righteousness isn't tossed to and fro. He's not driven about with every wind of advice, flawed and frail. The righteous is the one who's the guide. The righteous is the one who has his eyes open enough to see what's the wiser way to take. But the way of the wicked seduceth them. The wicked aren't going to allow themselves to be influenced by the righteous. Instead, what they're going to do is allow themselves to be influenced by the very way they want to take. There's a way which seems right unto a man, the end thereof the ways of death. You can't tell them anything because they already know what they want to do. Matter of fact, they can even find you a Bible verse and that supports what they want to do, although it'll be out of context. But remember, even Paul told the Thessalonians that regarding those that don't have a love for the truth, God will let them find a strong delusion that they should believe a lie. That truth is a broad one. Still applicable today. The way of the wicked seduceth them. They can be fooled, duped, convinced, and swayed by whatever they see that's telling them what they want to see. Whatever they hear that's essentially what they want to hear. So, who's influencing who? Am I going to be the one that's an influence? Or am I going to be the one that's being influenced by those whose ways are flawed? Verse 27. Verse 26 hits on both the moral and the intellectual. Verse 27. The slothful man, here we go again. There's a contrast between diligent and slothful, but here the slothful man roasteth not that which he took in hunting. The English Standard has roasteth not his game. That which he took in hunting would be his game, what he has acquired in hunting. Now, one translation approaches this from the perspective of he may not have even taken it in hunting yet. The point being, it's right there. It's ripe for the pickings, but he's not going to cook because he's not going to get it. Now, whether this is the one that is that won't start or the one that won't finish, and yes, there are slothful that fit both categories. The slothful man roasteth not that which he took in hunting. It's right there for him to take. It's already as good as in his hands, but he will not put in the work to prepare it. The substance of the diligent is precious, as the King James translates it, it seems that the diligent, the one that puts in the work and the effort, appreciates the substance that he had. He sees it as something precious. He appreciates it, values it, utilizes it. But keep in mind, the sense is that which he took in hunting, described in the first part of the verse. Who provides every morsel of food we have? Not only is it a matter of appreciating and making the most of profits, possessions, and that which is at our disposal, but it's about appreciating and making the most of providence. The substance of a diligent man is precious. He sees it as worth something, as something valuable. I believe it's the English Standard that translates this a little bit differently. The precious wealth goes to the diligent. No, there's something to be said about that too. In terms of the one who is diligent, who puts in the effort and who appreciates what is to be attained, he is the one that is more likely to possess, acquire, have the reward. The slothful man roasteth not that which he took in hunting. Let's put that into some terms that might resonate today. The lazy bum won't make a sandwich even when the meat's in the refrigerator. Any of us ever looked in the fridge, it's completely full, and said, there's nothing to eat? I just went from preaching and started meddling, didn't I? The slothful man roasteth not that which he took in hunting. It's right there at his disposal. But he doesn't want to put in the effort to bring what God has supplied to its full fruition. The diligent man's different. The diligent man can look into an almost empty fridge and say, hey, look, I've got just enough. I can make a mustard sandwich. I'm blessed. Ever had a mustard sandwich? You know why you have a mustard sandwich? Because ham costs too much. I can remember appreciating some mustard sandwiches along the line. Or a honey sandwich. Oh, those are really good. I still eat some of those in the morning. I just call it a honey biscuit. But the substance of a diligent man is precious. He appreciates what he has, and that tends to be the one that lends toward more success. Verse 28. With verse 27, we're going to attach to it moral and material ideas. And that covers so much of life in discussing diligence in labors, dealing with others and their emotional state, and influencing others, verse 26. Let's go ahead and get to verse 28 before that bell rings on us twice. In verse 28, we're going to call this in life. This is a summary statement. This is a conclusive verse to the entirety of the chapter. In the way of righteousness is life. In the pathway thereof there is no death. This verse involves the intellectual because the idea of the way of righteousness is so often connected to wisdom, but it's also the moral. We're talking about righteousness. There's the life, material responsibilities and duties. In the pathway thereof there is no death. The impact of all of this is going to deal not only with me, but every part of life, including my domestic responsibilities. In the way of righteousness is life. Is that always the case? Jesus was righteous. Why did they kill him? In the way of righteousness is life. In the pathway thereof there is no death. If we try to nitpick, we're going to look at some of these proverbs and we're going to say, well, that's not always true. Instead of realizing that these are general statements. And frequently, the best way to understand some of these proverbs and what they promise is to look at the long game and to look at the end goal. In the way of the righteous is life. That doesn't mean that there's not going to be hiccups and speed bumps and hardships and difficulties, but in the way of the righteous is life. And in that path, as far as the ultimate end of that path, it's not death. Righteousness being connected with all of these responsibilities mentioned in the chapter, the encouragement given, the way we deal with others. So, those things being said, we'll go ahead and cut off here tonight. We finished Proverbs chapter 12. Next week, Brother Mosier will be teaching. We'll give him Proverbs 13. I figured lucky number 13, Brother Mosier, that ought to work for everyone. But Brother Mosier will be teaching. And then following that, he'll also be teaching for a few weeks to come as we will be away. But we'll be picking up and moving forward depending on how far he gets. Thank you very much for your time tonight.